we called him and we said, hey, are you coming? And he said, no, I think Ethan's dead. And then we walked out into the courtyard and somebody said that Santa was dead.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. I feel pretty stupid for not being able to figure this one out earlier. I think we sometimes fail to think holistically, and I think that comes from the way Google programs us to think. Want an outcome? Click like. Click on this or that. Things tend to feel binary in a situation like that, but human dynamics are more complex, more subtle than off or on, a 1 or a 0. Now, while I think it's fair to suggest perhaps something else was going on at the house that someone didn't want to acknowledge, right, in terms of why did it take Dee so long to call 911, I think it misses the more obvious point. And so I think the specific question, why did Dee take so long to call 911, needs to be reframed to this. Why did Dee and B and the collective of students take so long to call 911? Or simply just, why did they take so long to call 911? And I sort of got the feeling when we look at some of the kids giving their side of the story, and it really makes it real, their side to things, the tenderness, the sensitivity, the real life experience that it is for them, including this.
One of the things that made it the toughest was the TikTok sleuths. TikTok sleuths and the people who made out the people that I love and know into monsters online.
Then I think the real subtlety of that human dynamic does start to shine through. When we see Martha giving her side of the story for the first time in some of these latest documentaries, as you've heard from Dateline, the answer now seems obvious. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started.
Just a lot of people that were really in shock. And so we didn't know if it was a carbon monoxide thing, we didn't know. And so we all basically stood in a big quiet circle and watched all the beginning stuff happen.
I don't think the students were primarily afraid of alerting the cops. I don't think that was the main concern. But I think what they were concerned about was of the natural consequence to doing just that. I don't think they were afraid of the cops as much as this idea that their parents would find out, right, that something terrible had happened and that there was now legitimate fear and that they would be sort of summoned home. You need to come home right now, right? And they had to have known in an instant that this would be high profile. It's not one murder, it's 4 murders. That it would at a minimum make the local news, if not the national news. And it sort of makes you wonder if that call came through when it did and just saying there's an unconscious person, was that kind of an early attempt to sort of minimize what was going on in order that the kids, bear in mind, even if you weren't in that house, if you were in the neighborhood, you would also be summoned home. And the other kids may not have been thrilled at this idea. So if you imagine, for example, a situation where D tells B something, or D tells someone else, or B tells someone else as well. But you would imagine D tells B and D talk about it, and then they tell other people about it, and then it becomes kind of something that many of them start talking about, right? Perhaps a boy or boyfriend is called. And perhaps that person convinces her to do nothing or at least to delay. Because as soon as they call the cops, the party is over for everyone. Basically, everything that was going to happen from that day forth, a party the next day, an exam a couple of days later, whatever graduation parties, all of that would come to a crashing end. And they don't want their party to be over. On Friday night, they had a rip-roaring party where 150 people attended. Well, that is all going to be over. And we do know, I haven't been able to find that information, but we do know that there were parties after the incident where one of the reporters, I think it may have been Brian Enton, just went into the apartment, or went alongside the apartments, and you could hear parties going on subsequent to the murders. But of course, all those kids were summoned home after that. And so it did bring things to a crashing end. Imagine it's the end of your senior year. Aren't you going to be desperate just to end it on the kind of high note that you wanted? And now this incident has interfered with that, has messed all of that up. Now, let me ask you a question, and it may seem unfair, it may even seem unkind. Sure, we know what you need to do in a situation like this as the true crime community. Sitting outside of it, it seems obvious. Just call 911. But think about how it feels like psychopathy, not in all respects, but in some respects, to this idea that there are dead people in your home or in your neighborhood, but your primary priority appears to be that you want to make sure that the parties go on. And that is part of, psychopathy is about impaired empathy, a lack of remorse, being egotistical, right? Think about that and this whole thing of not calling 911. Isn't there a little bit of narcissism involved that we want the show to go on? But then, of course, they did call 911, right? And then that is exactly what happened. On the 30th of November, there was a headline, Idaho students largely abandon campus after 4 are slain. It turned the campus into a kind of a ghost town. What a way to end your final year at college, especially after the pandemic had shut down so much. And I do think it's worth thinking about and talking about this idea of psychopathy in both a broad and a narrow way, right? Because I think it brings us to another aspect of the criminal psychology that we can kind of no longer avoid addressing. The crime is a portrait of psychopathy. And so that makes us ask, is Brian a psychopath? Which brings up another question, well, can a psychopath be neurotic? And the answer is absolutely. So we will be exploring this question in more detail, but one thing that is clear is anyone who is addicted to drugs or really seriously addicted to anything is psychopathic in terms of their attitudes to the outside world. Does that explain anything in terms of Koberger? And if one of the traits of a psychopath is the inability to distinguish between right and wrong, the sort of conflation of something with something else, you're not really able to tell the difference between reality so much anymore, right? Think about Brian's sister who was in a movie about a knife stabbing. Well, now so is he. Well, that may be how a psychopath thinks about it. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.